My name is Erica Cook Kelly. I am 48 years old. I am the oldest child of my father, Joseph Cook, Joe Cook, that's what he went by. I live right down the street from my dad's shop. And I would describe this shop and my father as magical, frankly.
My dad is Joe Cook. My name's Melissa, and I am the middle child in the family. My dad was interesting. He was an interesting, clever, unique, quirky fella.
I'm Joe Cook, Little Joe. My dad was Big Joe. Today we're at Big Joe's Hot Rod Shop. I'm the youngest, 41 years old. I'm excited to be here around my dad's majestic artwork. I'm just enthralled being amongst all of his years of creativity. He was a very free spirit, deep thinker. And as we look at everything he's created and everything he's touched, you know, it's a blessing to be around it.
So what would be your earliest memory of when you remember you're conscious of his interest in old cars and this stuff?
So my earliest memory was, in my childhood home, my dad had, a huge garage in the back, and we had this huge concrete slab that was poured in the back of the house, and it was all just filled with cars. It was a big parking lot of cars. And I remember just being a young girl, and my sister and I, my older sister, we used to roller skate just like in and around the cars. And there was just always, people stopping by, checking out cars. My dad was always working back there. That's when he first started. He was doing all of his pinstriping projects in the back of the house. So people were dropping off cars, and he was always working out there, just around the kids playing.
Well, frankly, I don't think any of my dad's children would have a time frame or a memory where this wasn't involved. And this meaning, my dad and his cars and his artistry. And that is what he did. That is who he was. So my dad was collecting cars before we were born. And there's lots of stories about that. So some of my earliest childhood memories, like we grew up in the town, in Somers Point, New Jersey, which is basically over the bridge from the shop. And my dad by trade was a pinstriper. And so when we were kids, that's what my father did for a living primarily. And so he had a small, old school wooden picnic bench that he would sit on. And probably my earliest memory of my father would be watching him pinstripe cars in the backyard. And I can still see he had long, beautiful fingers. And I can still see how he would take off the excess paint in the backyard and stripe. And he just hours and hours. And that's what he did all day long. So that's what I remember is my dad striping and a cast of characters coming over with hot rods and motorcycles. And so that's what it's in our blood. That's what we grew up with. So I don't have all of those words, or I don't have a memory that my father wasn't this. Right. He always was this.
When I was a little guy, I went with him everywhere. Probably from the time I got out of diapers, I went to every street rod drag out at Englishtown, or I'd go with him to Carlisle. I'd always be in the back with him, It was always interesting to see what he was going to come home with that weekend. There was always a new car. Sitting in the stands watching your dad drag race car after car after car was a phenomenal experience for me. Then waiting for him to come out of the pits, many years, many fond memories of, like, he had a baby blue Oldsmobile with a fiberglass hood. It was an old Super 88. It wasn't the fastest thing. I think that thing maybe went like 1450s, but it was cool at the street rod drags. And a cool thing as a kid is riding in a car all the way up to Englishtown that he could then drag race. He drove it all the way up and then he ran it. So it was cool being like, I'm riding in the race car, super cool car. Anything he ever drove in, it had his touch. It was a wicked pinstripe job on that thing. Somewhere we have pictures of that car. And that was something special, you know. That might have been the biggest thing going up for the street rod drags, because Englishtown would have the swap meet, you know, they'd have the car show and the part sale, and just walking and going, you know, touring the sites with him. It was something special. Watching people come up and gawk over his artwork, you know, then he'd be setting up pinstripe jobs, you know. A lot of times he'd bring the paint with him, and I'd be, you know, watching him stripe something. Fond memories as a kid.
So do you have a memory of any of the like growing up, either riding in or driving around, or any of the stuff where you were actually in the cars?
So we were always in the cars because he didn't have normal cars. You know, my mother had a station wagon. So if you were corralling children, we would be in the station wagon. But we had, in fact, I think when my parents were first married, my mom had some sort of like dune buggy. Crazy, like in Brantine, New Jersey. And they would have car seats and some of this crazy stuff. So I remember like my first time as a really little kid, I loved rumble seats. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Loved them. And he had something that had a rumble seat before, but he always had a vet. He always had Corvettes. He always had, I mean, you grew up just listening to that roar of the engines in the backyard of the house. So he didn't drive a normal car. He never did. He never did.
So when you were going to school, or if he took you somewhere?
Please. Yes. Yeah, I think my sister would speak to him driving, my dad driving the 31 Ford, and it didn't have a top. And he would drive her to like swim team practice in this car. But I never had a sense of being embarrassed because he was different at all, because I thought it was so special. Yeah. So it wasn't like my dad would drop you off a block away. First of all, he wouldn't have stood for that at all. Okay. And second of all, you were proud of who he was. So, you know, he would always have some sort of hot rod, some whatever he was driving at the time. We were just used to that.
So I got into swimming, which was also a shared passion with my dad, because my dad was a swimmer back when he was like a young man. So it was something that I got into, but my dad was like right there every step of the way with me. I mean, he woke up every morning, like I swam 2 times a day, and he would drive me into Atlantic City at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he would sit there, watch the whole entire practice. I mean, he never missed anything. So, and often, most of the times, those practices were in some sort of hot rod. So we were driving to a practice, and not like the best section of Atlantic City, and my dad's hot rod, like at all seasons, or driving home from a swim meet in the middle of winter in a hot rod with no roof. My sister and I, we always laughed because she didn't know this until like after my dad passed, and I was telling her, there's that 31 Ford that's at my childhood home, and I hadn't seen it for years because I never went into the garage. And I was like, oh my God, I hated that car. And she's like, why? And I was like, because Dad used to make me ride home from practice in it, but he insisted that I put on like this pilot's cap. And I was like, a 17, 8, yes, is it right there? Yes. So like, as like a 17, is this it?
I don't know.
No, this is like a mask. But yeah, as a 17 or 18-year-old girl, like, 16-year-old girl, like you don't want to be in a hot rod coming up from practice down the Garden State Parkway, in the middle of winter, in like a hot rod and a weird cap. But so she just like found so much humor in that because that was who he was.
You, as a kid, it sounds like you, more than the girls, were you were probably tagging along or doing more of the car stuff at an early age. Were you helping him to kind of tinker or any of that stuff? Like, do you have any memories of like when you went with him having to fix something or anything? Like,
I wasn't so much fix things on the road. Probably the practical joke was, here, carry this, and then if we sell it along the way, I'll give you $25. You know what I mean? There was different things, probably a few manifolds I had to carry around, but here, the couple cars, the Dick Lewis, and then he had a 32 5-window that went a couple years ago. From the time I was 12 years old until I moved away, I was the chrome guy. Everything was chrome underneath it. So I knew those cars, every nut and bolt underneath them, like you'd ever see.
Polish this.
Oh
Polish
yeah,
that.
polish that. I was the polished guy. When I was little, my first car was a '46 Ford that he striped up. Very fun car, and it got me into auto detailing. And under his guidance, I learned, it got me into the cars, and in that way I was working at a gas station learning the practical stuff. So as I progressed, we'd be over here swapping rims out, swapping tires, a lot of bodies on different chassis. My son's just about to turn 20 years old right now, and knowing what it's like having young teenage kids around, I had a group of like 3 guys that we were always around my dad. Anything he wanted to move, we'd be here all the time, just popping in, hanging out with him.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all kinds of stuff.
Is there a car that is it the Roadster at the shop that you remember the most? Is there a car that you remember the most from your childhood that he had or was tinkering with? Or
No, I don't really. There's not a specific car because there was so many, right? There were so many. Like my dad has a whole album of every car he's ever owned, and like a couple of weeks before he passed away, we pulled it out and we were looking through and asking him questions about all of them. He remembers every single one. Would tell you in great detail where he got it, what he did to it, sometimes he could even tell you what he sold it for. So I mean, it was like all in his brain. It was cool that he had saved that album. So there was always a rotation of them. Nothing really stuck out more. I think the one that's most special to me is the Corvette, because I know how much he loved that. Like our childhood phone number was Old Vet. It still is. And I grew up back in landline days when you were in grade school and someone's like, oh, what's your phone number? Old Vet. And they'd be like, what is that? Like, old Corvette. That's my phone number. So that's what it still is. We still have that landline.
So the Roadster pickup is the one you remember the most. Is there any of them that you, as you got a little older and could drive, do you remember any early memories of being like him letting you drive a cool car?
I probably the 2 of the coolest cars that I've driven. He had a fiberglass car, 39 Ford Cabriolet. His buddy Jim Tonelli had built it. Had a 468 big block. That was his wolf car. It was like a teal color, cream colored rag top. But he painted the firewall to be a wolf, like with its mouth attacking. It was pretty wicked, the artwork. And then later years, he'd take it around with no hood. So I got to take that to a couple car shows the older I got. A few times he let me light it up going down the street here. That was cool. The second coolest car amongst one of his series of quick turnaround cars, a glass Model A T-bucket with a 350 and a 2-speed. And he let me take that from the Summers Point house out here, which is a good 12 miles. And he was riding in front of me, so I couldn't. He kind of kept the speed down, but I'd let him get a little bit ahead, go over the train tracks back there, and I caught up to him pretty quick. But that was a fun car to ride in.
That's cool that that you were able to experience some of these cool cars that he was messing with. Do you have a car that is you remember the most, or that was your favorite or impacted you, that has been around for a while? Is there one of the cars?
I think, there's several, if I can answer that.
Yep.
Because there was always like some equally magical cars that he owned. He had, in terms of vet, there was a Greenwood that he owned, and I don't know if it was the first owner of it, but it was this black vet, and it was a very rare vet, and he had that for a long time. The 57 vet, I will never not look at a picture of that and think of my dad. That was just, he loved it. It was his baby. He loved it. The 31, just because he was, the 31 Ford, because he was older. And here's a, late 60s-year-old man driving it on the Parkway South. And the vacationers would come down. And here's this older guy driving this crazy thing as his daily driver, a 31 Ford. I mean, that's outrageous. And so that I will always remember of my father. And our family intends to keep that vehicle because that is my dad.
That when you took the Let East?
Yeah, we took this to Let East. Kind of a lowered truck for his standards, and for mechanically lowered, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It was just staying low. But that was a pretty wicked ride. The thing purred.
And that's his card there, the Wizard?
Yep. He was striping the whole time we're there.
That's cool.
And I might have been 12 or 13, and they were filming a chop that was getting done. Mm-hmm. My dad said we got there for 15 minutes, and I disappeared, and he found me. And I was inside of a car with a box cutter, cutting all the black off for the torch cut. Whether it was undercoating, but I was black, and he just looked at me. He's like, "Your mom is going to kill you." But he said, I went to those places. Everybody was always friendly, and hey, kid, you want to help with this? And I said, hopped right in.
So that was probably a proud moment for him seeing you just jump in and get right to it.
Yeah, and he striped some stuff there. It's one thing when you're watching your dad stripe out in his own shop. It's another thing when he's doing it and there's a crowd around watching. That's very special. It makes you proud as a kid seeing man.
Yeah, that's my dad. Yeah.
That's my dad.
Yeah, it's no different than a sports player or something.
Yeah.
Your kid's watching him on the field. You're watching him do his thing, and everybody's admiring it, what he's doing. So that's super cool. Obviously, you guys can't keep everything in one shot. So,
yes. Nor do I want to. And the reason why I don't want to keep this place, is because I don't want it to, not a diminution of value. It's not that. It's not money. It's that these things could be used by someone. And, excuse me. I always thought, my dad, as a person, to breathe new life into the automobiles of our past, Americana, the rich history of American automobiles. And to let any of this stuff just sit and deteriorate is just not something I want to happen. I'm sorry if I'm doing this. I'll stop.
No, you're fine.
No, because I do want to have it be meaningful, because I mean this. So it is meaningful to me that my dad's legacy still has life and it continues to live. And it's funny, right after my dad passed, he had this, I don't know if you've ever seen it at Hershey or Carlisle. It was called, I'll show you pictures. It was this little truck. I don't know what the year, it was orange. And it had, my dad called it the Hawaii truck. And it was painted and it had kind of a Hawaiian theme. A young guy after he died was at Hershey or Carlisle and saw his Maui truck and sent pictures of it. And someone else was loving it and enjoying it and proud of it. And my dad's artwork, someone else had. And I think that is could you ask for more? Could you ask for more? Yeah, I mean, I think anyone would love to have a Joe Cook, either parts that Joe Cook owned or something that was painted by him, or, I'm just happy to have it continue on and not, as opposed to other hobbies and maybe other collectors of memorabilia. These things are repurposed. And not only is it American history, but it's utilized appropriately. It still continues with that same purpose. It's not an item to be put on a shelf, but it can be admired and kids learn about automobiles. I think that's amazing that legacy continues and generations are passing it down, as opposed to, here's a doll, I collected this doll, pass it on. This is, there's a certain utility to hot rods that it keeps going and you can get in them and drive them and and admire them too.
I think I just want it respected, you know. He loved all of this. Like this is my dad, you know. Everything in here. And I want someone, you know, when someone buys something to love it as much as he loved it, or take something that, you know, in my eyes isn't lovable and turn it into something that is, you know, be like, oh, wow, I'm going to make this into that. Because that's what he did, you know, so that's my wish for all of this.